So that covers the basic API integrations. I was going to talk about hosted now. So let me just grab that customer reference. We'll see why in a minute. So there we go. So the way the hosted code works is you send a request to us to initialize and create the hosted session, which includes a subset of the information in an API request. So you've got your reference for the transaction, the amount, currency, a description, reference for the customer, and importantly, a return URL. This is a URL for us to redirect the customer back to after they've requested the transaction to be processed and after we've processed it. Send that off, and in the response is a redirect URL for you to send the customer to. Could be in the main page, could be in an iframe. So to show how that works, in this case, it's doing it in an iframe, and there's the payment form. Now, it's good at this point to point out this form has a lot of flexibility in terms of skinning. So a custom skin can not only have a custom CSS, but also change the text of all the inputs, and can have custom JavaScript, which can change the page quite dramatically if you like. So we're very flexible in what you can do on how this page looks and feels.
So Martin, in this example, it's iframed in your shop?
Yes.
But is there any other way that you can integrate?
It can be the full payment page, the full screen page itself. It's just a URL to get to the user however you like. So something else I want to talk about briefly is that redirect URL. So in this case, this redirect URL, if you ignore the regular expression, is to return return.php, this page here. But I've added a get parameter of R, which has in it the merchant reference for the transaction. And that is so that after the resumption, you can do a get transaction request to look up the details of the transaction that's just occurred. And that's because when we redirect the user's browser back to you, there's no information in that redirect about what happened to the transaction. It could have been successful, it could have been declined. There's so much information. It could have been 3D secured, it could have not. Our recommendation is that after the users come back to you, details of the transaction to find out what actually happened. Now, I've done it by putting the transaction reference in the URL because this is a stateless integration. More than likely, you'll have a customer session and all that information there. So that is pretty much it. So let's go through and see that actually work. I can tell I've been doing it already today. There we go. So what you didn't see then, although it flashed up very quickly, is on the host return page, I've also got a bit of JavaScript to escape the iframe, because the redirect will occur while the user is still in the iframe, so that allows them to escape once they're on the same domain. And then, it's search for the transaction by the reference using, it's good to talk about the documentation for here. Request a previous transaction. So when you want to retrieve the details of the transaction that's previously happened, you can do a GET request if you know our transaction ID and just put it in the URL. Or if you want to use search by your own reference, then the request is by ref, with that merchant ref equal, and then your reference. And then the response is all the same information about the transaction you would get in an API response if you just processed it. So at any point after the transaction's occurred, you can just get the details again and again if you want to confirm what actually happened. So that is what the host integration has done. It's got the details, picked up the transaction master and the amount, and displayed them on screen, just as we did for the API examples. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about the flexibility of the hosted integration. So, no, it's not. I remember there's something else I was going to do first. So one of the other great features of the hosted platform is that it retains the customer identity, so the customer can come back and get their previously used cards. And that is why I saved that customer reference from before. So if the customer comes back to do a new transaction and you give us the same ID, then when they come back in, the card they saved beforehand is still there. They can update that card. They can add new cards up to a configurable limit. I think for Explorer Can, the limit is set to 3 or 5. Can't remember exactly. We can change it for you at your request. And so it's a built-in wallet for the person to contain their cards and reuse them, and to really speed up the user experience.
That's great, because it just comes out the box, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There's nothing you need to do to enable that. It's just built in. Also, 3D Secure is built into the cashier, the hosted cashier. There's nothing you need to do to get it. It will just automatically happen and work, and you'll get 3D Secure transactions when the card is enrolled, if you've got 3D Secure turned on, which I said default by Explorer account is turned off, but you can have it be turned on, and obviously if you set up a real account, that's one of the things we'll go over. Do you want it or not? There we go. Now so some of the flexibility of the customer fields. So this would be a good time to go into potential custom fields. So in our hosted form, you can request there to be more fields on the form than the standard set to collect additional information that's of specific meaning to you. You can also have control over the amount, so it doesn't have to be just a fixed amount. It can be free form, so the user can enter whatever amount they want. It can be from a choice. You can give us a list of amounts, which the user can select from. It can be a range, so the user can input anything between a minimum and a maximum, or it can be a combination of choice and range. There's just a lot of flexibility. And in terms of custom fields, so there can be text fields, which is labels, which appear on the form. And actually, the example is much clearer here. Here we go. So in this scenario, the amount is a choice, 10, 20, or 50. In the fields, I've got an additional label field, which will be at the top of the form. I'm going to include this text, online shop checkout. There will then be a text field called offer code at the bottom of the form. That'll be labeled as special offer code. And a select field takes some inspiration from sort of the online money-raising sites, choosing a perk to go with the deposit. This will also be at the bottom of the form with all these different options. So to show how that looks, I was going to use the same customer again. So there we go. We've got that label at the top. The amount is now a select. They can enter choose their item, enter the number, and go. And those fields will come back in the get transaction response. So you can choose the details of the transaction and see what the person entered.
That's great. So you can get some real customer personalization on the page if they want to, if a merchant wants to.
Even without skinning, you can grab all this additional data. There's a lot of flexibility on the form. What you can additionally do is, I can't demo it. I haven't got integration yet to show how it works, but you can request the callback, a pre-auth callback. So they will be in here somewhere. It'll probably be on this example. No, it's not on that example. There they are. So we have various callbacks. So these are additional to the standard API request, additional communications to get more details of the transaction. So one of those things is a pre-auth callback, which basically means just before, the last thing we do before sending the transaction to the acquirer for authorization is we'll make a request to you at the given URL that says, here's all the information about this transaction. Yeah, and include where it's got its 3D Secure status, the amount, and all the custom fields. And we'll say, here's all the information about this transaction. Do you want us to proceed or cancel? So, for example, on the payment form, you could ask the user to capture a password to authenticate who they are. And then you receive the pre-auth callback. You can look at that password, if it's what you expect them to enter, and if it is, proceed, and if it's not, abort the transaction at that point. So they've not even gone through, and no message has been sent to the acquirer. Transaction has just been abandoned.
That's a real in-flight control.
It is, absolutely. What you in fact can additionally do at that point is, in response to the callback, you can say, hang on, before you go to authorization, I want to redirect the customer this completely other different location. So if they're using hosted, it will see that you send out your response to the callback is actually redirect the transaction to here. Hosted will redirect the person to that URL. So you can send them through whatever second stage verification process you might want to do, such as an age verification process or address verification. KYC, whatever you need to. And then when you're completely happy, you can send a resume transaction request to hosted. Much like the resume transaction request to the API, you send to the hosted, this session I did earlier, start it up again. We send you back a URL, and then you can pick it back up.
And because these are flexible, the merchant can pick and choose which customers this happens to, basically.
Yep. Yeah, so it's per transaction which callbacks you want, or you can have them configured. So this is I want there to always be a callback. This will be the different URLs. There's a pre-auth callback. There's a post-auth callback, which occurs just after the authorization. It basically tells you details about the transaction as occurred. Or separately, there's a transaction notification. The difference between those two is the pre-auth callback happens immediately, and you need to respond to it. And the person will be sitting there waiting hosted while we wait for you to respond to the post-auth callback. And in some scenarios, the transaction can be reversed at that point, depending on the acquirer support. Or separately, transaction notification. This is a message we'll send to you all about the transaction after it's occurred. And that might be to like a couple of seconds after, depending on current load. So it's great as a feed of information of all transactions that have occurred, but I wouldn't recommend it as guaranteed, wait for that to turn up before you feed back to what's actually happened.
So that might be useful to supplement, say, a finance system or a general ledger or marketing platform with details of transactions more or less as they're happening.
Yeah, any server you want to have, any application you want to have all the details of all your transactions, have it receive these notifications, and the transaction notification that's the callback. Actually, here's an example of a callback. But it's got all the same information about the transaction. You see these same objects, the payment method, the customer, the transaction details, and all the different requests and responses from the system. So that shows hosted with additional flexibility.